Appreciate everybody taking the time out of your days to join us for, I think, will be an exciting and a pretty relevant conversation given today's security market conditions. I'm Will Seidel. I'm the Director for Channel and Alliances here at Panzura. As we're a channel-led organization, I'm always excited to have on one of our key strategic partners, CDW, that can join us for this discussion. Quick introduction of who's on the call. From CDW, Jeremiah Salzberg. He's the Chief Security Technologist. And then also Don Foster from Panzura, our Global Head of Sales Engineers. In a moment, I'll definitely turn this over to these guys so we can dive in. But for right now, I just want to let everybody know we will keep a tally of questions during the presentation. If we see something that's relevant that we need to stop, we will, but we may hold them until the end of the presentation where we've left time for Q&A. Just quick agenda overview. We're going to start this off with Jeremiah. He's going to give an overview of ransomware security threats. And then we're going to hand it over to Don Foster of Panzura, who's going to talk through how Panzura plays a significant role in the strategy of data resiliency and how to recover from a security threat is just as important as protecting your data. Please stick around for the Q&A at the end. And thanks for everybody for joining us. So Don, Jeremiah, I'm going to turn it over to the smart people. I appreciate everybody's time.
All right, excellent. Well, I'm going to kick it off here. Let me start off by making sure my actual clicker works. There we go. Fantastic. So who am I? I'm Jeremiah Salzberg. I've been in security for almost 30 years. I have been a pen tester, been an incident responder. I've taught hacking courses to the NSA and at Black Hat and other individual courses. I have done just about everything you can do, including becoming a CISO. I saw lots of gaps in the world for CISOs that actually understood security and decided that I needed to go into becoming a CISO. And realized there's some enjoyable things, but at the same time, I'm now recovering CISO because the things I did not enjoy, budget and politics, were about half the job. And so I got away from the budget and politics. I got back to technology where I truly enjoy it. So I get to really look at what is happening in the world of security. You look at all the different vendors. I like to say I make security vendors cry on a daily basis because I give them very direct feedback of what needs to improve, what we need to do better. And sometimes just tell them no, like we already have 12 products that do exactly that same thing. We don't need a 13th. So it's a fun time. I also get to meet with our largest customers, talk about security strategy, and I get to do webinars and speaking events like this one, which are lots of fun. And I've already done two this week, and so one in person and one remote, and so this will be my third one to talk. This is fantastic. You know, really, this is over. I'm talking a lot about who are attackers. It's something I really enjoy doing. So I've been in security for so long. I look at things from that attacker point of view, right? I've been a pen tester. I'm always looking at how do I break in, and so I'm really interested in how our attackers are breaking in and who are they, really what methods they're using, and then how do we really help protect ourselves from them. Let me get the clicker is not clicking again. Let me magically click. There we go. So let me start off talking about our attackers. We've seen the same groups of attackers time and time again. I like to call them organized cybercrime. They're not just basic ransomware groups or things like that we call them. These are groups that are truly organized. And we've seen them before, especially in the financial sector. We saw the same types of groups that are attacking us for a long time. I was a CISO at a bank, and so we had lots of wire fraud attacks. These wire fraud attacks were using extremely well thought out and perfectly executed attacks, oftentimes attacking third parties. So they were attacking our escrow companies that were in the middle of transactions, taking over their email and sending fraudulent wire transfer instructions from the email, perfectly formatted in there. So those same types of groups that we've seen before are the same groups we're seeing attack us in basic ransomware, in more complicated attacks. We've really funded them with all that wire transfer fraud. I also work for a company called MoneyGram, and we were attacked all the time. Those same types of groups are doing all of this. The thing that this group is able to do is handle money, right? They're able to take all the money they're receiving and use it, right? They figured out how to clean it, and that is probably the key factor that we're seeing out there, is that these groups are the same groups that have been able to handle money before and handle where it goes, right? So we also see a lot of the groups coming up from areas where the government is very, sheltering to them. They like the fact that they're taking money from other countries and bringing it into their country. I'm really talking about Russia here. I'm not going to call these groups state-sponsored. That's, I think, maybe too clear of a line there. I think it's a lot more fuzzy. There's a lot of sharing of information, and people that were in the government are now in these groups. But we're definitely seeing them operate a lot more freely in Russia, meaning that they take the money and they're just able to spend it. They don't have to clean it. They don't have to do anything else. They're just able to operate fully there, right? And that's something that I think Russia loves to see, right? And they've been helping them increase their capabilities. But the other thing that all of these groups are doing is they're taking that money, and instead of just spending it on fancy cars and gold chains, whatever gangsters are going to buy, they're spending it on people, right? They're investing in project managers. They're investing in development teams. They're investing in more pen testing level individuals to do much more advanced attacks. So these groups continue to get better and better at what they do because we continue to pay ransoms, right? And their goals are always to get paid. I'm going to talk a little bit about methodology in a bit, but they are getting paid because they figured out what each different type of company, organization, school system, hospital, etc. What does it take to get them to pay, right? And so they've really perfected this to an art, and it's not always ransom. There's a lot of different things they're doing these days, and I'll get into that a little bit. And again, click. Oh, there we go. And we're also seeing kids in basements. I know this is a shocker. I started out in the hacking world as a kid in a basement, right? I actually wasn't always in a basement. I used to get on the bus in Minnesota from the St. Paul campus and go to the Minneapolis campus and work on the mainframe systems there with my mom's account, playing around, having fun. It was just a learning exercise. I never did anything malicious or bad. I always tell people, if you've seen the movie War Games, that was basically like my childhood. I did a lot of war dialing, ran a BBS, and we talked about what numbers to dial, but again, never did anything malicious. That's not what we're seeing today. We're seeing groups, and we're talking about maybe like Lapsus here, where they're going after major companies. They're being pretty successful. A lot of things that they're doing, I think, could be prevented by some pretty basic levels of controls, but at the same time, they're not good at handling money. This is the one thing that Lapsus hasn't done well, is get paid for all the things they're doing. And that's partially because I think if they did get paid, they're not going to know what to do with that money and how to use it cleanly. And I think we've seen some arrests in that group because of that. A lot of the ways we go after these criminal organizations and people are through follow the money, traditional policing methodologies, because that's the best way. I mean, if you want to be truly anonymous on the internet, you can. You just have to maintain it and make sure that you never ever let go of that anonymity, and you make sure you're always careful. So these ones, I think, obviously have it, but we're seeing some more of this in just groups that are out there having fun. We're seeing some of them are just trying to see what we can do. But we're also seeing people attacking other people, and especially kids attacking kids in a lot of these different forums and Roblox and all these things. There's a really great podcast on Darknet Diaries about talking to somebody who was actually in this group and all the different ways that they were attacking and how they're getting phone numbers to actually, get around SMS-based multi-factor, which I absolutely hate and think everyone should get rid of, but people are still doing it, and there's methodologies. They're running into T-Mobile stores and running out with a iPad to start doing transfers for phones. So it's a pretty crazy thing. It's a great podcast to go listen to, but this is still like coming up from kids in basements. It's very interesting. Now, nation states, I think we talk a lot about this. I think it's really important to talk about what are the motivations behind nation states. And that kind of helps you understand how to protect yourself against them, but also, are you going to be really in the line of sight for nation states, right? We've got two major ones to talk about. Russia, as I mentioned, they really are just about disruption, right? They want to disrupt the West. They want to, also maybe prove that they're as good or better than the West. And so a lot of what they do is about showing that they're better and also impacting the U.S. as much as possible. Now, critical infrastructure is a target for them. They've gone after different environments there. Some of them I can't really talk about because I've been involved in some of the response for that, but they're definitely still targeting it. We have a lot of very small utility districts and water processing plants and things around the country that just don't have the resources to protect themselves. I've been doing a lot of pro bono work with a lot of those groups to kind of help get them a little bit more secure, at least get some basics in place, you know, multi-factor, which it's crazy. It's still places that don't have it, and some basics. But we have a really, really vulnerable system to this. And so I think we're going to see more of those types of attacks come out. They do love all the money being stolen from the US and Europe and bringing that into Russia. So I don't think as a government they're really doing that. I think they're just sheltering those organized cybercrime groups that are, right? And so they're not the ones doing the ransomware. They're not the ones attacking and holding your network at ransom. They're the ones that are just pulling it out, right? Or allowing it to be pulled out and accepting it. Now, China is totally different. They're interested in information. They're information stealers, right? And they have a lot of different ways that they take information in. Some of it's not stealing at all. You're just freely giving it to them. And I think we've been talking a lot about TikTok, and it's something that is potentially a risk, right? There's a lot of data that's they're collecting and pulling it back. And they're doing all this to kind of build profiles on everyone everywhere. I mean, you think about the amount of data that they're pulling, it's crazy, but they want to know about everyone in every country and how it relates to them. How can they make money off of that or how can they do better as a country, really? How do we make the motherland better, right? It's a lot of we want to dominate the world through IP and understanding everyone. They do it even more severely on their own people internally, and we're starting to get to sort of, Black Mirror. If you've ever seen the Black Mirror nosedive episode, that's kind of where they're getting. You have to have social media scores of a certain level to be able to rent cars and things. It's actually how it's happening. It's exactly what was shown in that one episode. So it's getting a little scary to live in China, but outside of China, they're still collecting information. And I've had a lot of CISOs come to me and say, should I block TikTok? I'm like, sure, block TikTok, especially on corporate devices. But honestly, there's a million other apps you have to start looking at. That's the tip of the iceberg. You're gonna look at everything else owned by China that we know is owned by China. You have to start looking at all the apps that we don't know are owned by China that China owns, right? So it's going to be dangerous, right? There's going to be a lot more work involved. So sure, block TikTok, but think about what you're not blocking, and think about all the other information stealers out there, like Facebook, right? There's other things out there that are bad, that are stealing all your information. They've also done very active attacks too. So that's all the passive and legal attacks, really, of gathering information. But we saw the massive Exchange attack last year. The really interesting thing about that is that Exchange vulnerability that they took advantage of, all they did was steal all the email, right? And you think about what data is in your email. Think about everything that's in there, all the intellectual property, all the information about how your company operates, all the details and all your payments to suppliers and what you're paying for goods and services, what you're charging for goods and services. All this data, they love that. It's perfect for them. It's both helping them compete, both on that intellectual property front, but also on, we know how you're charging for things. But they're also gathering all the personal information, all the details about all the emails and who is who in a company and what are you doing there and how do you talk to others. And it's amazing the sort of information that they're collecting and doing. But that same Exchange vulnerability allowed full access of that Exchange server as a full remote access vulnerability. So they could have gone beyond just stealing email, but in every instance we've seen, they haven't gone beyond that. They just stopped there at the Exchange server, grabbed all the email and exfiltrated it, and didn't do anything else that they could have done. So it's interesting, you see some of these motivations just like, that was our motivation, our goal was achieved, we're done, right? We don't need to do more, right? And so that was an obvious and interesting sort of very direct example of how they're motivated and what they're interested in. Now, data brokers, I kind of joke about this as data brokers. Facebook's a data broker, but I'm really talking more about the groups that all they're doing out there is gathering data that they can steal, PII data, credit card numbers, social security numbers, all this basic information they can grab. If they can grab it and they can sell it on a forum, that's all they do, right? And the real difference between like data brokers and organized cybercrime is organized cybercrime is looking at a much larger attack, really getting fully into systems. Data brokers just want to get as much data as they can and get out, and they're abusing APIs, they're abusing web servers. I always talk about is abusing an API or web server that allows you to access all that data. Is that truly hacking? Well, depends on what you're doing. But I've gone to websites and saying, okay, well, if I change this discount code, and I keep going by one, am I hacking that website, or am I just finding a better discount code by trying multiple numbers? And maybe I'm automating that, right? Not that I do that, but is that hacking, right? And so there's a great question as to whether or not I access an API and I pull all the data out of the API. Did I just hack your API, or was it just a use you didn't want to happen, right? And so we've seen one company that had all the data stolen out of their API, and they said that wasn't a breach, that was just unapproved use of their API, right? It wasn't a breach. It was, what was it? But a lot of data was stolen. All this massive information was stolen out of there. We've seen that time and time again. And so one thing we're really concentrating more on is that API security. We're starting to get better at it, but it's definitely where these data brokers are going after, because they know they can get the most amount of data there. But still attacking web servers, that's their basic MO. And then selling it on the dark web or the not so dark web. Everyone talks about the dark web, but there's lots of other places people sell just on normal websites that you don't have to use Tor to get to. It's pretty normal these days, and still pretty underground. So who are they targeting? Anyone, right? Anyone who can pay, right? If you can pay, say, $100,000 ransom, if your company is not that big but can pay $100,000, as many companies can, you're a target, right? If they can do a couple days work and get paid 100 grand, they're pretty happy with that, right? And it's everyone. Now, there's certain groups that they're targeting more because they just know they can get paid. We're seeing a heavy ramp up in attacks on manufacturing, right? And why manufacturing? Because if you can get to that OT environment, that manufacturing floor plant, if you can get in there and stop it, right, and make sure that they can't restart it without your approval, so you're encrypting something or you're taking over a system, not giving them access, whatever you're doing, if you can keep that line down, they know exactly per minute most of the time how much money they're losing, right? How much money have they already lost because the line stopped, right? What's the loss of product on the line, right? And what's the cost to restart the line? There's oftentimes a restart cost of lines. And then how much money per minute is that line going to be, how much money are we losing when that line's down? So they love manufacturing because of that. And so we've seen some massive ones, like maybe we could talk about Colonial Pipeline and other ones that are in the news, but we've seen a lot that have not been in the news. I've been involved in a number of them, and we don't hear about them in the news because manufacturing plants don't like that information getting out. And so there's a lot of this happening. I think we're going to see more and more of that. We might see even more once we start to have disclosure laws. Another group I'm starting to see them target heavily is law firms, right? And this is really interesting because it's just about the data that law firms have. They don't necessarily go and encrypt anything at law firms. They're just gathering the data and exfiltrating it, right? And some of the data in law firms are things that could maybe get somebody disbarred, right? So not only am I going to impact your business, but now I'm going to impact your livelihood from now on, right? That's the sort of thing that they're holding over some of these law firms. And those law firms, in that case, they're going to pay. And law firms are kind of used to paying to get out of jams, right? There's nothing new for law firms. My dad's a lawyer, so I can make all the lawyer jokes I want. Now they know how to get out of this, and they like to pay to get out of it. And so law firms are something we're seeing targeted more and more. I think we've seen a few that are in the news, but at the same time, we're seeing a ton that aren't, and we're going to see more and more of these happening. So it's a lot of rich data that they have at their fingertips for there. So how are they attacking us? This is a lot of different ways, right? But really very traditional, right? This is things we've been doing in pen testing for a long time. They're coming in with truly excellent social engineering attacks. That's kind of the beginning of this whole thing is they're writing perfect emails, they're attacking us, they're getting in, and really once they're in, they're getting just a tiny dropper out. They're looking at what's running on your system, and oftentimes they know what's running on your system beforehand by doing some other social engineering work, some open source intelligence gathering, like looking at your LinkedIn job postings for, CrowdStrike engineers, or need somebody who knows Windows Defender well, right? Looking for job postings and things like that. Also calling up your employees and fully social engineering them to give them information. If you ever get a chance to go see the DEF CON social engineering contest, it's pretty amazing. And some of the ones you'll see there will raise the hairs on your neck, as you know that your company is 100% susceptible to that. We're all susceptible. I did a talk in a social engineering conference about how to attack IT and security people with a generic campaign. And when I was done with it, I asked how many people would click on this campaign, and a lot of people rose their hands, but I'm like, who thinks somebody on their team would click on it? And everyone did. So I think we understand we're just susceptible as anyone else to those social engineering attacks. But once they're in, now they've evaded your endpoint, right? And they've written custom evasions for these. We've seen a lot of those. We're also seeing custom droppers to initiate a command and control connection out. And so these things are getting past a lot of the basic defenses we have in place. And once they're there, they're quiet, they're stealthy, they're expanding their access, they're getting access to other systems. It's very standardized methodologies we see again and again. And because they're being so quiet, it's very difficult to see them. They're not just downloading malware, they're not just downloading ransom. I mean, their first goals are like, what do I have access to? And what can I start to exfiltrate, right? Can I start getting data out? And then they'll be getting data out for as long as they can. And then when they start to think that they might be being detected, that's when they start dropping ransomware. And I got a great example of exactly how this happened. And somehow my click-through has been destroyed here with a lock, but just ignore the lock. This particular attack started with social engineering. They saw somebody post on LinkedIn that they just gotten a degree, and everyone gives them the hand claps and everyone's loving it. So they send them a phishing email saying, hey, this is your college, and here's a digital copy of your certificate you can use in LinkedIn in your professional environment. Click here to download it. So they downloaded it, right? And once they downloaded that PDF, it looked perfect. It had a perfect PDF image of their certificate. It looked great, but it also came with a little tiny, very quiet command control dropper. And what did that do? Nothing. Waited for 18 hours before it did anything, and it started to connect out to the command control. Okay, I had somebody redo all of these for me, the icons, and they did them wrong. So I'm just going to blast through this here. That once they had access to that command control system, they accessed another computer on the network. They compromised a different computer, and this is very normal to happen because you don't want to do your main attacks from the initial point of entry, right? You always want to go to a secondary computer if you can and do all your attacks from there, because then you don't burn your initial access. Very standard tradecraft, very standard things we're seeing out there. That computer, first thing it did, start looking at file systems. Same thing I do when I'm a pen tester. What file systems do I access? What can I get? Normally, rich amounts of data available to me. And then I take all that data, right? Start sending out to the command and control server, right? So we're exfiltrating data, right? This happened for a while before they decided, hey, let's see what else we can do, right? They found a vulnerable server on the server network that they had access to. They compromised that server. It was a Linux server that was running a vulnerable version. Somebody had not patched of something, and they were able to compromise it, take it over. Once from there, they figured out that that Linux server had an 80 connector on it. They were able to use that 80 connector and get domain admin credentials. Then everything went down. Once they got all the domain credentials, once they got access to other servers, they went after the backups. And they didn't just delete backups. They started changing the backup routine to back up directories that were not ones that should be direct. They're backing OS directories instead of data directories, right? And so they started destroying backups over time, right? But they're all just sitting there doing nothing. This was detected during a change control process. One of these server admins said, hey, I just noticed somebody created an account, looks like a valid account because using our standard naming conventions. Who created this? Brought it to the change control committee. Change control committee said, nobody, we don't know. Let's go research it and we'll find out. Next change control meeting in 2 weeks, they're like, hey, yep, we're going to mark this as unauthorized because we couldn't figure it out. And then they start researching it, trying to figure out what is it, what's going on. And they finally turned it over to the security team and said, hey, we just don't know what this is. And then it started branching out to a much larger issue. They started seeing accounts everywhere. It was pretty serious. And so the security team said, okay, we're going to initiate our incident response process. Here's exactly what we do. They had practiced it, which is great. And they had an incident response plan that the attackers also had access to. So the bridge line in there was compromised, all the data about how they would respond and who they'd be calling, all compromised. And so as soon as they started activating the incident response plan, then they started encrypting everything on the network. And so, and deleting any backups they had access to that weren't already written, and they started going down. So this is something that was fairly standard, right? This type of attack we're seeing on a regular basis. This is a single attack, but I've seen other ones almost exactly like this. You know, little details are different, but this took the customer months to detect, right? So we're talking about months of a time frame to detect, which is still above the leading average. We're still talking about, 9 months to a year as an average to detect attackers in your environment. But they found it in months, which is great. But that was months the attackers had really just dug in and had access to everything, right? So there we go. They're doing that still a lot. They're still going in. This is still something we're seeing, but we're also seeing them get away from ransomware. And I think they're getting away from ransomware because we're starting to have the technology to protect our data better, right? And we're going to hear more about that later. But with that technology, we're starting to get a better job of actually making sure our data is protected. They're moving more towards not encrypting, but just exfiltrating that data. Like, can we get the data out of the building, right? They know they can do this quicker. They know they can get paid quicker. It's a much better methodology. We're seeing triple ransoms from them then still. We'll give you access back to your network. We'll decrypt your data, and we'll delete the data that we've exfiltrated. They sometimes give you bundle deals if they've done all three. Normally, we can help you get access back to your Active Directory. The only problem is, can you trust it once you have access to it? Normally, once AD is fully compromised, the best rule of thumb is to burn it to the ground and start afresh, which is a whole nother level of work, but it's what we're seeing you have to do. So how do we protect ourselves? The biggest problem out there, we see CISOs have 10 number one priorities, right? They have, so many things that there's always that 11th one that should really be done. And I talk to them and say, it needs to be done. And normally that's, data security. And they're like, oh, it's number 11. We just can't get to it. But I think that one has to be brought back in. But it's just the problem is that there's so many different things that you have to concentrate on, either from compliance or, the basics of security that you have to do. All these things are out there. And I do talk to CISOs a lot about, like, make sure you have the fundamentals down, secure builds, making sure that you have your environment as locked down as possible, as basic configuration security. There's a lot of things you can do that don't even require money or anything, like creating canary accounts. I love canary accounts and canary documents. Those are just things we create in AD. We create canary domain admin, a canary normal user. They're fake users, and if you ever see anyone access them, you create an alert in your SIM and you investigate, right? You'll get a couple false positives a year. You get a couple of your pen testers probably doing it. You'll catch them quicker. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Also create canary files out there for like domain, like here's your network diagram, because I find so many network diagrams in folders when I shouldn't. So I always tend to open them because I believe that they're really there. But if you create some fake ones out there, it's good to have files that if somebody touches it, you investigate it. I still really prevent as possible. We're getting better at this, but until you have that capability where you have the basic secure builds and the fundamentals down, prevent is extremely difficult. I found this out with my own son, who compromised his system that I had really decent endpoint security on, but he had local admin on the box, and was able to figure out how to disable my AV to install a game update, game mod that he found. That turned out to be actually malware. And so I was watching for that in my network because I sinkhole all DNS into my Pi hole, and I see a lot of the communication going out, and I'm like, what the heck is that? And so most people don't have that. So you got to really worry about those home networks. But prevention with good configuration is possible. I'm really talking to people about this detect and respond. You need to make sure that you can detect things very quickly. You can get to them as quickly as possible, but you need to be able to respond quickly too. And that means a lot of automation is necessary. We're seeing some great automation methodologies where SOC analysts get as much information as possible from all the tools built in. So they have links to all the tools, all the information, and they have the ability to do quick actions. Isolate system is a button, remove rights is a button, activate playbook if it's a server and you can't do either one of those two. Things like that to start processing automatically helps significantly. It's starting to get our dwell time down to minutes rather than months, right? This is really where we need to spend a lot of time. I'm a big fan of zero trust. That term has been destroyed by marketing, but the concept is really, truly valid. And I've been talking about zero trust before marketing ever got a hold of it. The concept is really simple. We no longer trust the network. The network is assumed compromised. Now, how do we make sure we have secure communications to applications and systems? We do that by validating users and system state rather than what network they're coming from. Unless it's one of those networks where you have to belay from the ceiling and they have, all sorts of things, a la Mission Impossible style. Those networks you can still use as an authenticator. Everything else, not a good plan. Now, I think this is probably the most important slide of the entire deck is recover. It's the one thing that we have in our control, right? We can't stop attackers from getting in 100%. There's no way to completely prevent them. We've got nation state attackers that are interested in our information. We have extremely well-funded organized cybercrime getting in. You have to be prepared for total system compromise. And to be prepared for that, you need to have all of your data backed up in methodologies that is truly ransomware proof, right? It has to be separated from the main authentication system. You need to make sure that it's truly protected. You need to make sure that it is backed up locally and able to be restored quickly, but also backed up to the cloud. Now, I do this, my thing I tell everyone is think about your most important thing at home, right? What's your most important? Most important for me is my kids' pictures. I can never recreate my kids' pictures, right? I have my kids' pictures backed up at home locally. I have it backed up to the cloud, right? When my hard drive fails, because I buy cheap hard drives for some of my systems and they're going to fail eventually, right? When that fails, I can easily and quickly restore from backup locally. If there is a fire or theft or something at my house and those systems are gone, all my stuff is up in the cloud, right? And so you need to make sure that you have a multi-tier backup strategy that includes backing up locally, backing up remotely, and you have to make sure it is 100% ransomware proof. And I think that is where I'm going to hand it over. Oh, there's a quick marketing slide for CDW. We're a huge, gigantic security integrator. We got the people to help you with all the stuff I just talked to. That's all I'm going to say about that, and I'm going to hand you off over to Don.
Hey, thanks, Jeremiah. Awesome listening to that speech. I mean, thinking through all of the potential kind of attack vectors, how people are doing it, the social engineering. I always love listening to those sort of topics because it brings the reality that the human element's still that number one component we have to pay attention to, and that we're all vulnerable, right? And I think what I've come to realize, and I've spent, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Don Foster. I run all the sales engineers for Panzura. I've spent well over 25 years now in IT and in storage and software in a number of different spaces. And one of the things that becomes more and more real, realization to folks is it's no longer about being able, to your point, truly prevent. You can put great prevention measures in and make it easier to detect and do that response, but you can't really do the proper prevention. At least the black hats are usually a step ahead of the white hats, right? So from our perspective at Panzura especially, and something that I've seen work across a number of large organizations, small organizations as well, is to start thinking, all right, it's not about if, it's when, and how do we make sure that we provide that resiliency of the infrastructure, to your point, Jeremiah, that I can recover as fast as possible, respond succinctly, and maybe even help to drive a bit of a detection component back into the systems for my security teams and the other folks. So that's really what I want to dive into on how what we do at Panzura can really help you change the idea of how some of the file systems, right? The places that people go to first, the file shares, the unstructured data that's driving the bulk of your business and can be the most high risk, how you can ensure that you have the proper response and recovery action from an immutable backend storage that meets a lot of the goals that Jeremiah outlined, right? Having protection, having data written out to the cloud, multiple versions, multiple copies, and kind of showcase how we can help you build that resilient infrastructure while also modernizing and lowering costs around that unstructured data that continues to accelerate at crazy rates. So assuming I've got control here, let me try one more time. I do, awesome. So the opportunity at hand for all of us is to really think about how do we mitigate the organizational risk behind hacking attempts, cybersecurity threats, ransomware, and do that while also meeting the goals of the business to modernize the storage strategy, tighten security links, simplify some of the operations, and also leverage the cloud where it's appropriate. What we at Panzura have really been focused on over the last 12 months especially is helping you transform your unstructured data and providing that unstructured data management that gives you that mobility, the access, the security, the control, all from that native cloud integrated file system that is essentially a global file system that's native to your environment, that's going to help you drive that next resilient approach that ensures you can recover quickly, but also ensures that you have the immutability, and to make sure that ransomware is no longer a threat to your data in that unstructured data stores. So how do we really do? Jeremiah highlighted a number of techniques and technologies, right? Being able to respond quickly, being able to recover data. In order to do this without the silos and the complexity and the costs that I'm sure many of you are suffering from today, you need to start thinking just a little bit differently with the new technologies that are available and how you can sort of transform that unstructured data sets into a true hybrid cloud global file system. And what we at Panzura do is we give you a single authoritative store within the cloud or an on-premise store to actually be that authoritative backend for all of that information within those file systems live. And we do it in an immutable fashion. We leverage snapshots for version control and ensure that that immutable data will essentially live based upon the data retention policy that you require. Now, giving access to that means providing essentially caching nodes to the users, the offices, the locations, maybe even the cloud applications in the different regions to ensure they have the performance they need to drive that local access and control. And the interesting thing about how Panzura's global file system works is that it allows us to create a ring of data across all of your offices or all of your user access points and really combine that technology for the performance, but then also that security. Because as users interoperate across that single global file system, we're generating controls and snapshots, which I'll talk about in just a moment, across that entire organization to ensure that we're synchronizing this entire authoritative file source centrally, ensuring that you're not running into the sort of the version control mess that oftentimes we run into with these sort of parallel file systems, but then also giving the performance that your end users need while knowing that data is instantly being moved out to the cloud and being secured in an immutable store. What all this essentially brings together is it helps you cut down the silos, reduce some of the attack surface areas. It's really centralized on a hardened, secure global file system that will also reduce the cost of those traditional NAS architectures and allow you to start using some of these cloud technologies in a way that you can give that instant collaboration to your entire organization without creating all those different silos, file systems, and infrastructure components. It's really a collaborative hybrid cloud file system that's going to help unlock that next round of business innovation. The really interesting thing is how we keep this information secure. How do we ensure resiliency and recovery for your unstructured data? So I think coming from the backup recovery space, I think any of us that work with backup recovery know that one of the hardest things to do is to recover those millions and millions or billions of unstructured file sets, especially if it was encrypted, deleted, lost, a disaster occurs. The time it takes to do that restore can sometimes take even longer than it was to create. And that can be a very onerous process. So what if you could simplify that response time? Or even a small data set or a large data set, tie that into this entire immutable global file system and give your business the ability to recover quickly based upon the ability to track changes across that file system and revert back from snapshots. That's what Panzura does as a part of our Cloud FS. Whether it's an on-site location or whether it's a cloud location, if we're running Panzura nodes, we're going to give you 2 access points for how users are going to write data into this global file system. And from those nodes, we're going to drive immutable snapshots in the back end of that storage, tracking the different file changes that are occurring. As those snapshots execute, it's going to be processing and leveraging our information and data for the meta information behind that file system, as well as the data that's being written to buckets. And it's going to be instantly moved in a deduplicated, compressed, and encrypted format. So in flight and at rest within then that S3 store, often being that cloud authoritative store, be it AWS, Google, Azure, you name it. As that synchronization occurs, you now have that authoritative store that is building that back end of data for your file system securely held inside the cloud. And every 60 seconds, this process is occurring. So what happens if a ransomware attack comes? We can simply choose the point in time before we found the actual execution of said ransomware attack or the encrypting points of all the data, and we can help you identify that, and we can simply revert back from snapshots quickly and effectively so that you don't have to pay any ransom. We can even allow your end users to recover files if it was just a simple mistake or change that they have to drive themselves. It's all about giving end user response, but also IT and business level response within these large unstructured file systems very, very quickly. And it could be even an attack that takes down a virtual machine. Panzura runs as a part of VMs for those access nodes. If we were to lose one of those virtual machines, we can even provide high availability, again, with all of that version snapshot control stored out in the cloud to ensure that your business can instantly fail over, still have access, and still respond from that ransomware attack. And the last interesting thing about this entire infrastructure is that the meta information of that file system, there are data services alerting. So you can start to see anomalous behavior. You can see if data is being exfiltrated. You can go through and run reports against different users and identify whether it's a user that's exfiltrating data, a process, or maybe a set of users that have just resigned, track what their usage patterns are and catch what data has been moved, and also catch some of the patterns that might be occurring across this entire global file system. So it will help you with that response. What can be a truly survivable and immutable and resilient infrastructure. For example, if you take a look at this right here, this is something that Panzura enables for a number of our customers and clients. They may have a number of different offices, sites, VDI locations where customers or users log in through a VPN and have access to local resources. They might have cloud regions that run applications and have needs to store unstructured file data. And there might be multiple clouds in which that information needs to be stored. We can take this highly this point to that cloud blob storage, ensure that we're smartly and efficiently maneuvering that data into the cloud blobs, making sure it's secure, viewed, encrypted, compressed, but then also making it highly available across multiple cloud stores and making all that information highly available across multiple sites. So the site becomes resilient, the access to the cloud location becomes resilient, and even the data within the cloud and the snapshots and the versions are all resilient. This is part of what a true survivable and immutable example of what a Panzura infrastructure for unstructured data can truly achieve. And you start to tie this back into how we can report from a PDS perspective. You're able to start to tell the story of your data leading up to that point when that ransomware attack or that hacking attempt might have occurred, and be able to understand exactly what was at risk, and also detail what going forward might be at risk, and give you that ability to detect and respond very quickly. So look, there's a lot of other technology we can talk about. Recovering from a ransomware attack is more than just snapshots and recovering and versioning. It's a lot also about setting up your architecture and security components appropriately. So let's some time and talk more tech and get deeper, maybe specific to your own needs. And there's a couple of assets you can look at. I mean, we do have a whiteboard video on our YouTube channel around how Panzura works from a big picture perspective. And what we just talked about here in a little bit more in-depth process. And so to get a deeper dive and talk more tech about how we can help you build that resilient infrastructure, recover quickly from ransomware, reach out to your CDW representative. Let's talk about your resiliency initiatives. Let's talk about some of the unstructured data challenges you have. We can highlight how we can give you a faster response time, a more secure, a more controlled unstructured data infrastructure, but then also highlight how we can help you reduce cost at the same time. And we look at a demo and get into more details specific around your organization's incident response plan and how we can help speed that. So I hope this was interesting. I think now I want to open up and see if there's any questions within the audience. Jeremiah, if you want to pop back in, by all means, if there are any questions, please feel free to load one up there within the question and answer widget within the GoToMeeting, and we'll definitely want to jump right on those. I think we have many popping in just yet. Hope this webinar was exciting for folks. Jeremiah, I have one question for you here, just to as we bring this to a close, just from your experience. You gave a couple of great examples. What was one of the most shocking social engineering examples that you've learned of?
You know, I mean, they're getting extremely creative. We actually got a fruit and nut order eval. So this was from a fruit nut company that actually, this is actually a place I worked at, but we got an update from them. It said, hey, here's our new updated price list. Here's a PDF. It came from them, was again perfectly formatted and exactly linked to us. So the great thing is that we did have some detection from the EDR system we had in place to find out that it was actually doing a lot more than a PDF should. And stopped it, but at the same time, it was a perfect example of you know, don't trust anyone, even the people you know, right? It's that sort of business email compromise. We're seeing it more and more. It's been so common throughout the ages, but like they're not just attacking you, they're attacking everyone you do business with, and we're seeing that in supply chain attacks. We just saw the recent, you know, double supply chain attack where a supply chain, one of the companies attacked by another through a supply chain attack, and then attacked everyone else through their supply chain. So I mean, we're seeing just crazy things going on, and it's truly impressive that the level that they're going to, and the true skill that we're seeing.
That's definitely interesting. I can definitely tell. I've never subscribed to Geek Squad, but I get a ton of Geek Squad year subscriptions about ready to expire emails almost every day.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have any questions? So I guess I'll help bring this to a close. Jeremiah, thank you so much for the talk today. Great insight on just some of the things that you've experienced and sort of what's happening from the cybersecurity side of the world. And hopefully, you know, we were able to give a little bit of insight to how Panzura can help in that response and recovery, delivering a truly resilient infrastructure that can really help keep your data available and get it back fast if that attack does happen, or when that attack does happen, I guess we should say. Questions? Thank you all again. Thank you, Will, for kicking us off, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope this was a valuable webinar for you all.